corrupt politician tried to bribe Arnold Schwarzenegger, regretted it when he revealed his true identity. The Sacramento evening air hung heavy with the scent of jasmine and exhaust fumes as the last rays of sunlight painted the Capitol building's dome in shades of copper and gold. The marble corridors inside were mostly empty now, the usual bustle of staffers and lobbyists having given way to the quiet that settled over government buildings after official hours. Only the occasional echo of footsteps or the distant hum of a cleaning crew's vacuum broke the silence that seemed to seep from the very walls of this temple of democracy. In a small conference room on the third floor, far from the grand chambers where laws were debated and voted upon, a meeting was taking place. The room was deliberately chosen for its anonymity, its lack of windows, its position away from the main thoroughfares where curious eyes might notice who was coming and going. A single overhead light cast. His seat probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, custom-tailored to hide the softness that came from too many expense-account dinners and not enough actual work. His hands, manicured and adorned with a gold Rolex that caught the light with every gesture, rested on a leather briefcase that sat before him like a promise or a threat. Blackwell had built his political career on a foundation of backroom deals, strategic donations, and the kind of flexible ethics that allowed him to sleep soundly at night, despite the trail of compromised principles and broken promises he left in his wake. He had mastered the art of appearing clean while operating in the shadows, of speaking about integrity while practicing corruption, of building a public image that bore no resemblance to his private actions. Across from him sat a man dressed far more modestly. He wore a simple gray suit that looked off the rack, a white shirt with no designer label visible, and a plain tie that suggests. His accent, thick and unmistakable, had made Blackwell's lip curl slightly when they first spoke, though the senator had been careful to hide his disdain behind a practiced smile. Foreign consultants were useful, Blackwell had learned over the years. They often didn't understand American politics well enough to recognize when they were being manipulated, and their outsider status made them easy to discredit if they ever became problematic. Blackwell leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in a gesture he had practiced in front of mirrors because he thought it made him look thoughtful and authoritative. "So, Mr. Arnold," he said, deliberately leaving off any last name, a subtle way of diminishing the man across from him. "I appreciate you taking this meeting. I know your time is valuable." The man called Arnold nodded slightly, but said nothing, his posture relaxed but attentive, his face still partially hidden in shadow. His silence seemed to unsettle Blackwell slightly. "I've reviewed your preliminary report on the Riverside Development Project," Blackwell continued, opening a folder that contained several pages of dense text and environmental impact assessments. "Your findings are concerning. You've identified numerous violations of current environmental protection standards, potential contamination of groundwater sources, destruction of protected wetlands." He paused, letting the weight of these findings hang in the air. If this report were to be submitted in its current form, it would kill the project entirely. Arnold's expression didn't change, but his eyes, those distinctive blue eyes that remained mostly in shadow, seemed to sharpen with interest. "That is correct," he said, his accent making each word distinct and deliberate. "The project, as currently designed, violates multiple state and federal environmental regulations. The impact on local ecosystems would be severe and potentially irreversible. My job is to provide an honest assessment, and honestly, this project should not proceed without major modifications." Blackwell's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it, only the predatory calculation of someone who had played this game many times before. "I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Arnold, truly I do. But I wonder if perhaps your assessment might be insensitive, overly cautious. Sometimes, in the pursuit of environmental perfection, we lose sight of the bigger picture. This project would create thousands of jobs, generate millions in tax revenue, revitalize a struggling community. It would also poison their water supply and destroy habitats that have existed for thousands of years, Arnold replied calmly. Jobs and tax revenue mean nothing if the people are sick and the land is dead. Blackwell's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. He wasn't used to consultants who pushed back, who didn't immediately buckle under the weight of economic arguments and political pressure. "You're quite passionate about this," he observed, his tone suggesting this was somehow a weakness rather than a strength. But passion, while admirable, sometimes needs to be tempered with pragmatism, with an understanding of how the real world works. He reached down and opened his briefcase with deliberate slowness, the leather creaking in the quiet room. From inside, he withdrew a plain manila envelope, thick with what could only be cash, and placed it on the table between them. The envelope sat there like a coiled snake, dangerous and impossible to ignore. "I'm prepared to offer you a consulting fee," Blackwell said, his voice dropping to a more intimate, conspiratorial tone. "A substantial fee in recognition of the complexity of this project and the need for a more nuanced assessment. $50,000, cash, no paper trail, no questions asked. All you need to do is revise your report. Not lie, of course. I would never ask you to lie. Just perhaps emphasize the positive aspects more. Downplay some of the environmental concerns. Acknowledge that with proper mitigation measures, the risks could be managed." Arnold stared at the envelope for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched out, broken only by the distant hum of the building's ventilation system and the muffled sound of a vacuum cleaner somewhere on another floor. Blackwell watched him carefully, confident in his read of the situation. This was a foreign consultant, probably struggling to make ends meet in expensive California, probably sending money back to family in whatever country he came from. $50,000 would be life-changing money for someone like that. "And if I refuse?" Arnold asked quietly, his eyes still on the envelope. Blackwell's expression hardened slightly, the mask of friendliness slipping just enough to reveal the steel beneath. "Then I would be very disappointed. And I would have to question your objectivity, your professionalism. I might have to share my concerns with the agency that hired you, suggest that perhaps you have some personal agenda, some bias against development projects. It would be unfortunate if your reputation were to suffer, if future consulting opportunities were to dry up." The threat hung in the air, barely veiled, the kind of pressure that Blackwell had applied successfully dozens of times before. Consultants, contractors, analysts, they all had mortgages to pay, families to feed, careers to protect. When faced with the choice between principles and practical survival, most people chose survival. And those who didn't, well, they found out quickly that fighting the system was expensive, exhausting, and usually futile. Arnold reached forward slowly and picked up the envelope. Blackwell's smile returned, genuine now, the satisfaction of another successful manipulation warming him like expensive whiskey. "I knew you were a reasonable man," he said, his tone shifting back to friendly, almost paternal. "You'll find that working with me can be very profitable. This is just the beginning. I have many projects that could use someone with your expertise and your flexibility." Arnold opened the envelope and looked inside at the neat stacks of $100 bills. His face remained impassive as he counted silently, his thick fingers handling the money with surprising delicacy. Blackwell watched with barely concealed satisfaction, already planning how he would use this compromised consultant in future schemes. How useful it would be to have someone with environmental credentials who could be bought. Then Arnold closed the envelope, set it back on the table, and pushed it across toward Blackwell with one finger. "No," he said simply, his accent somehow making the single syllable more powerful, more final. Blackwell's smile froze, confusion flickering across his features. "I'm sorry. What?" "I said no," Arnold repeated, his voice still calm, but now carrying an edge that made the temperature in the room seem to drop several degrees. "I will not revise my report. I will not compromise my professional integrity, and I will not accept your bribe." The word bribe hung in the air like an accusation, stripping away all the polite euphemisms Blackwell had wrapped around his offer. The senator's face flushed red, anger and embarrassment warring for dominance. "Now wait just a minute," he said, his voice rising slightly. "That's a very serious accusation. I was simply offering you a consulting fee for additional work." "You are offering me money to lie," Arnold interrupted, his tone still measured, but now carrying unmistakable authority. "To falsify an environmental report, to help you push through a project that will harm people and destroy protected ecosystems. That is not a consulting fee. That is a bribe, and it is illegal." Blackwell stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His carefully maintained composure was cracking now, revealing the ugly reality beneath the polished exterior. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he hissed, leaning forward with his hands on the table. "I am a United States Senator. I have connections that go all the way to Washington. I can destroy your career with a single phone call. I can make sure you never work in this state again. Hell, I can make sure you get deported back to whatever country you crawled out of. And if you're watching this corrupt politician dig himself deeper and deeper into a hole, not knowing who he's really threatening, you absolutely need to subscribe right now, because what happens next is going to be absolutely perfect." Drop a comment telling us if you've ever seen someone this arrogant get what they deserve. And trust me, you don't want to miss how this ends. Arnold stood slowly, unfolding to his full height, and suddenly the small conference room seemed even smaller. His presence seemed to expand, to fill the space in a way that made Blackwell unconsciously take a step backward. Arnold reached up and adjusted his tie, a casual gesture, but it drew attention to the breadth of his shoulders, the thickness of his neck, the physical presence that his modest suit had only partially concealed. "You want to know who you're dealing with?" Arnold said, his voice still quiet, but now carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Let me tell you a story, Senator Blackwell. In 1968, a young man came to America from Austria with $73 in his pocket and a dream. Everyone told him he would fail. His accent was too thick. His name was too foreign. His dreams were too big." Blackwell's face had gone from red to pale, a sick realization beginning to dawn in his eyes as he really looked at the man before him for the first time. The distinctive jawline, the unmistakable accent, the physical presence that even a cheap suit couldn't hide, the blue eyes that had stared out from movie screens and political podiums for decades. That young man worked harder than anyone else, Arnold continued, his voice growing stronger, more passionate. He won Mr. Universe at age 20. He won Mr. Olympia 7 times. He became the highest-paid actor in Hollywood, despite everyone saying his accent would hold him back. He married into one of America's most famous families. And then, because he believed in public service, because he wanted to give back to the state that had given him so much, he ran for governor of California. Arnold pulled out his wallet and placed it on the table, flipping it open to reveal an official identification card. Even in the harsh overhead light, the seal of the state of California was clearly visible, along with a photo and a title that made Blackwell's remaining color drain completely from his face. "My name is Arnold Schwarzenegger," Arnold said, his voice now carrying the full authority of his position. "And I am the governor of California, the man you just tried to bribe, the man you just threatened with deportation. The man whose environmental regulations you are trying to circumvent with your corrupt development project." Blackwell stumbled backward, his legs hitting his chair, nearly falling as the full weight of his catastrophic mistake crashed down on him. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his brain apparently unable to process the magnitude of what he had just done. The confident senator, the smooth operator, the master manipulator had just attempted to bribe the governor of California to his face. Arnold picked up the manila envelope and held it up. This envelope, with your fingerprints all over it, containing $50,000 in cash that you offered me to falsify an environmental report. Do you know what this is called, Senator? This is called evidence. Evidence of bribery, evidence of corruption, evidence of conspiracy to violate environmental protection laws. I didn't, you can't, Blackwell stammered, his practiced eloquence completely deserting him. This was a setup. You entrapped me, Arnold's expression hardened. I entrapped you? I came to this meeting as a consultant, as I was hired to do. You were the one who offered the bribe. You were the one who made the threats. You were the one who thought you could corrupt the process because you assumed I was just some foreign nobody who could be bought or intimidated. He walked slowly around the table, and Blackwell backed away, his expensive shoes squeaking on the linoleum floor. You want to talk about who I'm dealing with? Arnold said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. Let me tell you who you are dealing with. You are dealing with someone who has spent his entire life refusing to be intimidated. Someone who has faced down critics, doubters, and bullies at every stage of his career. Someone who became governor specifically to fight the kind of corruption you represent. Arnold pulled out his phone, and Blackwell's eyes widened in panic. What are you doing? I am calling the Attorney General, Arnold said calmly, his fingers moving across the screen. And the FBI, because bribery of a state official is a federal crime, Senator. You are about to become very familiar with the inside of a courtroom. Wait! Blackwell's voice cracked with desperation. Please, Governor, I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But think about what this will do to your administration, to the state, the scandal, the media attention. Is it really worth it over one project? Arnold paused, his finger hovering over the call button. He looked at Blackwell with an expression that mixed contempt with something that might have been pity. You still do not understand, do you? This is not about one project. This is about the principle that our government is not for sale. That environmental protections exist for a reason and cannot be bought off with briefcases full of cash. That public officials, whether they are governors or senators, have a duty to serve the people, not their own bank accounts. He pressed the call button, and Blackwell actually whimpered, a sound of pure despair that would have been pathetic if it weren't so richly deserved. Attorney General's office? A professional voice answered on the other end. This is Governor Schwarzenegger, Arnold said, his voice formal now, official. I need to report an attempted bribery of a state official. I am currently in conference room 312 at the Capitol building with Senator Richard Blackwell, who has just offered me $50,000 in cash to falsify an environmental impact report. I have the evidence secured. Please send investigators immediately and contact the FBI as this constitutes a federal crime. The voice on the other end responded with professional urgency, asking questions, confirming details, assuring the governor that people were already on their way. Through it all, Blackwell stood frozen, watching his career, his reputation, his freedom crumbling around him like a sandcastle before the tide. When Arnold ended the call, he looked at Blackwell with an expression that was almost sad. You could have been a good senator, he said quietly. You have intelligence, charisma, political skill. You could have used those gifts to actually help people, to make California better, to leave a legacy you could be proud of. Instead, you chose corruption. You chose to serve yourself instead of your constituents. And now you will pay the price for that choice. Blackwell sank into his chair, his head in his hands, the fight completely gone out of him. My career is over, he whispered. My life is over. Your career in politics is over, Arnold corrected. Your life is not over, but it will be very different. You will face trial. You will likely face prison time. Your name will become synonymous with corruption. But after you have paid your debt to society, you will still have the chance to rebuild, to become better, to perhaps find some way to make amends for what you have done. He placed the manila envelope carefully on the table, making sure not to disturb the evidence. I came to America believing in the promise of this country, that hard work would be rewarded, that integrity mattered, that the system, while imperfect, was fundamentally just. People like you, Senator, you threaten that promise. You make people cynical. You make them believe that everything is corrupt, that everyone has a price, that there is no point in fighting for what is right. Arnold's voice grew more passionate, the accent that Blackwell had dismissed as a sign of foreignness, now lending weight and authority to every word. But I refuse to accept that. I refuse to believe that corruption is inevitable. I refuse to let people like you poison the system without consequences. That is why I ran for governor. That is why I am standing here now, making sure you face justice for what you tried to do. The sound of rapid footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, growing louder. Blackwell looked up with the expression of a condemned man hearing the executioner's approach. The door burst open, and 4 people entered. 2 investigators from the Attorney General's office, badges prominently displayed, and 2 FBI agents in dark suits. Governor Schwarzenegger, the lead investigator, said, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and an all-business demeanor. We came as quickly as we could. Can you brief us on the situation? Arnold gestured to the envelope on the table. Senator Blackwell offered me $50,000 in cash to revise an environmental impact report that would have allowed a development project to proceed despite serious violations of state and federal environmental protection laws. He made the offer approximately 15 minutes ago. The money is in that envelope, which should have his fingerprints on it. I have not touched the cash itself, only the envelope. The investigator nodded, already pulling out latex gloves and evidence bags. One of the FBI agents approached Blackwell, who remained slumped in his chair. Senator Richard Blackwell, I need you to stand up, please. You're being detained for questioning regarding attempted bribery of a state official. Blackwell stood on shaking legs, his face a mask of devastation. As the FBI agent began reading him his rights, the words that every American knew from television, but never expected to hear applied to themselves, Blackwell's eyes met Arnold's one last time. I underestimated you, he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the agent's recitation of Miranda rights. I saw the accent, the foreign name, and I assumed you were someone I could manipulate. I was wrong. Yes, you were, Arnold agreed. But your mistake was not in underestimating me. Your mistake was in thinking that anyone, foreign or American, with an accent or without, should be willing to compromise their integrity for money. That is the corruption that I will fight for as long as I hold this office. As the investigators secured the evidence and the FBI agents prepared to escort Blackwell from the building, the lead investigator approached Arnold with a tablet. Governor, we'll need a full statement from you. This is going to be a major case. A sitting U.S. senator attempting to bribe the governor of California. The media is going to go absolutely crazy. Arnold nodded wearily. I know, but it is necessary. People need to see that corruption has consequences, that no one is above the law, that the system can work when people have the courage to stand up for what is right. The investigator smiled slightly. For what it's worth, Governor, you did the right thing. A lot of people in your position might have just refused the bribe and let it go. Avoided the scandal and the headache. The fact that you're pursuing this sends a powerful message. It is the only message I can send, Arnold replied. I came to this country with nothing, and America gave me everything. The least I can do is fight to make sure it remains a place where integrity matters, where the law applies to everyone equally, where corruption is not tolerated regardless of how powerful the person committing it might be. As Blackwell was led from the room in handcuffs, his expensive suit and perfect hair now seeming like a costume on a disgraced actor, other Capitol staff members began to gather in the hallway. Word was spreading fast through the building, whispers turning to urgent conversations, phones being pulled out to text and call, and spread the news that something major was happening. Arnold stepped out into the hallway, and the conversations died instantly. Every eye turned to him, questions written on every face. He stood there for a moment, his imposing presence commanding attention without effort, and then he spoke, his voice carrying down the marble corridor. "Tonight, Senator Richard Blackwell attempted to bribe me to falsify an environmental impact report. He offered me $50,000 in cash to help push through a development project that violates multiple environmental protection laws. I refused his bribe, and he has been arrested by the FBI. This investigation will proceed fully and transparently, and I will cooperate completely with federal and state authorities." The hallway erupted in shocked murmurs, but Arnold raised his hand for silence. "I want everyone here to understand something. This is not a partisan issue. This is not about politics. This is about the fundamental principle that our government is not for sale, that public officials have a duty to serve the people, not their own interests, that corruption, no matter who commits it, will be exposed and punished." He paused, his eyes scanning the faces of the staffers, lobbyists, and officials who had gathered. "Some of you may have been approached by Senator Blackwell or others like him. You may have been offered money, favors, or threats to compromise your integrity. I am telling you now, come forward, cooperate with the investigation, help us root out this corruption. There will be no retaliation against whistleblowers. There will be no protection for the corrupt." A young staffer, barely out of college, raised her hand tentatively. Arnold nodded to her. "Governor," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "what made you decide to go through with this? It would have been easier to just refuse the bribe and move on." Arnold's expression softened slightly. "You are right. It would have been easier. But easier is not always right. I have a responsibility to the people of California, to everyone who believes in honest government, to stand up against corruption even when it is difficult. Especially when it's difficult." He gestured down the hallway toward the grand chambers where laws were made. "This building, this government, it belongs to the people. Not to the politicians, not to the wealthy, not to the connected. To the people. And I will not allow it to be corrupted without a fight." The young staffer nodded, tears in her eyes, and several others in the crowd began to applaud. It started slowly, just a few people, but it grew, spreading through the gathered crowd until the marble hallway rang with the sound of appreciation, of support, of hope that maybe, just maybe, the system could still work. Arnold raised his hand again, quieting the applause. "Thank you, but do not applaud me. I only did what any honest person should do. The real test is what happens next. Will we allow this to be an isolated incident, or will we use it as a catalyst for real reform? Will we strengthen our ethics laws, increase transparency, make it harder for corruption to take root? That is the work that matters, and that is the work I am asking all of you to help me with." As the crowd began to disperse, energized by what they had witnessed, the lead investigator approached Arnold again. "Governor, we should probably get you somewhere more secure while we process the scene and begin the investigation. This is going to attract a lot of attention very quickly." Arnold nodded, but before he could move, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and sighed. "It is the Lieutenant Governor," he said. "I should take this. The news is probably already spreading." He answered the call, and even from several feet away, the investigator could hear the urgent, concerned voice on the other end. Arnold listened patiently, then responded in his characteristic calm, measured tone. "Yes, it is true. Yes, I am fine. No, I am not concerned about political fallout. We did the right thing, and we will deal with the consequences together. After ending the call, Arnold looked at the investigator with a slight smile. Politics. Always about managing the message, controlling the narrative. But sometimes the message should be simple. We caught a corrupt official, and we are holding him accountable. That is all the narrative we need. The investigator led Arnold to a secure office, where he could give his full statement away from the growing crowd and media attention that was beginning to descend on the Capitol building. Her message was simple. You showed them again, Governor. Thank you for proving that integrity matters more than power. Arnold smiled and typed a brief response. Integrity is the only power that truly matters. Everything else is temporary. As the car merged into Sacramento traffic, carrying him home after a day that had started ordinarily and become extraordinary, Arnold thought about the young man who had arrived in America decades ago with nothing but dreams and determination. That young man would have been proud of what happened tonight. Not because of the drama, not because of the headlines that would follow, but because of the simple act of standing up for what was right when it would have been easier to look away. The story would spread far beyond Sacramento, beyond California, beyond America. It would become another chapter in the ongoing narrative of Arnold Schwarzenegger's life. Another example of someone who refused to let circumstances or expectations define their choices. And somewhere, other immigrants, other people with accents, other individuals who had been underestimated or dismissed because of where they came from, would hear the story and find strength in it. They would remember that a man with a thick Austrian accent had become governor of California and had refused a bribe from a powerful senator. They would remember that integrity had nothing to do with where you were born or how you spoke. They would remember that standing up for what was right was always the correct choice, even when it was difficult, even when it came with costs. And maybe, just maybe, they would find the courage to make the same choice when their moment came. To refuse to be bought, to refuse to be intimidated, to refuse to compromise their principles for convenience or profit. Because that was the real lesson of the night, the message that transcended the specific details of Blackwell's arrest and Arnold's refusal. Corruption only wins when good people do nothing. But when good people stand up, when they refuse to be silent, when they choose integrity over convenience, corruption can be defeated. It might not be easy, it might not be comfortable, but it was always worth it. As Arnold finally arrived home, the lights of his house warm and welcoming against the California night, he felt a deep sense of peace. Tomorrow would bring challenges, media interviews, political fallout, the ongoing investigation. But tonight, he could rest, knowing that he had done the right thing, that he had stood up for the principles that had guided his entire life, that he had refused to let corruption go unchallenged. And that, more than any title or position or accolade, was what truly mattered. Not the power you held, but how you used it. Not the opportunities you were given, but what you did with them. Not the easy choices, but the hard ones, the ones that defined who you really were when the cameras were off and the crowds were gone. Real strength, Arnold had learned long ago, wasn't about physical power or political influence. Real strength was about character, about integrity, about the courage to do what was right, even when no one was watching, even when it would have been easier to look away. And tonight, in a small conference room in the California state capitol, that strength had been tested and had not been found wanting. The bribe had been refused. The corrupt official had been arrested. Justice would be served. And the message had been sent, clear and unmistakable, that in California, under Arnold Schwarzenegger's watch, corruption would not be tolerated, integrity would not be compromised, and the government would serve the people, not the powerful. That was a legacy worth building. That was a fight worth fighting. And that was the promise Arnold had made to himself decades ago when he first arrived in America, to never forget where he came from, to never take for granted what he had been given, and to always, always stand up for what was right, regardless of the cost. Tonight, he had kept that promise, and tomorrow he would wake up and keep it again. As they walked, Arnold reflected on the evening's events, on the choice he had made, on the consequences that would follow. He thought about Blackwell, about the man's assumption that a foreign accent meant someone could be easily manipulated, easily bought. It was a prejudice Arnold had faced his entire life. The assumption that being an immigrant, having an accent, somehow made you less American, less principled, less worthy of respect. And every time he encountered that prejudice, it strengthened his resolve to prove it wrong, to show that integrity had nothing to do with where you were born or how you spoke. He thought about the young staffer who had asked why he didn't just let it go, why he chose the difficult path over the easy one. It was a question he had been asked many times over the years, in different contexts, about different decisions. Why work so hard when you could coast on your fame? Why enter politics when you could just enjoy your wealth? Why fight corruption when you could just look the other way? The answer was always the same: because someone had to. Because if everyone chose the easy path, nothing would ever change. Because the America he loved, the America that had given him opportunities beyond his wildest dreams, was worth fighting for, even when that fight was difficult, even when it came with costs. As Arnold sat down to give his statement, walking the investigators through every detail of the meeting with Blackwell, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not satisfaction in destroying someone's career. That gave him no pleasure, but satisfaction in knowing that he had stood up for what was right, that he had refused to let corruption go unchallenged, that he had used his position and his platform to send a message that would resonate far beyond this single incident. The statement took over 2 hours, every detail meticulously documented, every word carefully recorded. When it was finally complete, Arnold leaned back in his chair, suddenly feeling the weight of his years and the exhaustion of the day. The investigator closed her notebook and looked at him with genuine respect. "Governor, I've been doing this job for 20 years. I've investigated dozens of corruption cases, but I've never seen someone in your position handle it quite like this. Most people would have tried to avoid the scandal, to handle it quietly, to protect their political capital. You did the opposite. You made it public. You made it transparent. You made sure everyone knew exactly what happened. That takes real courage." Arnold shook his head slightly. "It does not take courage to do the right thing. It just takes the refusal to do the wrong thing. Courage is for soldiers, for firefighters, for people who risk their lives. I just refused a bribe and made a phone call." "You did more than that," the investigator insisted. "You sent a message to every corrupt official in this state that they're not untouchable. You showed people that the system can work, that justice can be served. That matters more than you might think." As Arnold finally left the Capitol building, escorted by security through a side entrance to avoid the media circus that had set up at the main doors, he looked up at the dome, illuminated against the night sky. Somewhere in this building, in offices and chambers throughout the complex, there were probably other officials like Blackwell, other people who had compromised their integrity, who had taken bribes or made corrupt deals or abused their power. But tonight, at least one of them had been caught. Tonight, at least one corrupt official would face justice. And maybe, just maybe, others would think twice before following the same path. Knowing that there were still people willing to stand up, to speak out, to fight back against corruption, regardless of the personal or political cost. As his car pulled away from the Capitol, Arnold's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Maria, the young woman from Colombia he had met at the park weeks earlier. The news of Blackwell's arrest was already spreading across social media, and she had seen it.